I'm pleased to be able to present this, and it's really cool that we can use technology to do that instead of having to travel so much. So it's sort of, I can do this and do my work as well. So to get specifically to your question, social media, we've seen it just blow up in the last couple of years. And as with anything in our profession, when we look to the future of how it impacts our work, social media certainly was going to impact our work from a broad perspective. And then because of my area of expertise, I should say really my passion in terms of emergency management and all the things that go with that, it was try to understand how would social media impact. And not only the crisis, but also as we respond and as we recover. So what is it about social media that not only impacts our organizations, but also then how it impacts us? And so we've learned a lot since the explosion of social media, and we're constantly learning. So as you started today, Holly, it's really one of those issues or areas that we continue to learn more, and we will. And probably a year from now, we could sit down here and have another conversation and have learned some really unique insights. So, from a broad perspective, focused more on crisis communication is it gives us more tools to communicate, more tools to engage, but also on the flip side of that, create some very unique challenges for us as well.
Exactly. It's such a quick way for us to get information out, but sometimes that can be difficult. And we'll kind of get into that whole picture. I want to put one thing we talked about was, because of social media, that has given some people the excuse to kind of say, oh, we shouldn't craft these messages or statements or things like that. And I'm going to put up a slide that you had shared with me too. And really, that shouldn't be a reason to ditch the response statements, right?
No, it's not. In fact, I think, as we do one of the in our work and all of our passions, to get become better at what we do, we have to look at those kinds of things that make us work smarter, not necessarily harder. And with that comes knowing what we used to do, what was in our past, and as we move forward, what's going to make us work smarter, not harder. And so in crisis management, we used to have what was called holding statements, and that is where organizations would have a pretty canned response to throw out to their shareholders, their stakeholders, or our community in many respects. The onset of social media, the prevalence of it, and really how it has changed our landscape requires us to look at things like response statements. And response statements are nothing more than having something ready to go in a very short period of time to our parents and stakeholders. And sometimes it has to be, in what I would say in all cases, you really have to target that, because when you have an incident at a school, your parents of the kids that are attending that school want to know immediately what's happening. So what is it that you're going to be providing to them in terms of the information? So a response statement really is designed to establish our fact-based position to our stakeholders and our public. So what's happening? And how we do that is really to develop these concise statements to be used for a variety of audiences and mediums. And what I mean by that is because we communicate not only via our standard or our traditional methods, email and voicemail, if you have rapid response networks, but also through social media, your website, if you have a Twitter, if you have Facebook, all kinds of the ways that you look at things. It's our first opportunity, look at it from this perspective, it's our first opportunity to shape the message. So we have to, I think one of the previous slides you had to this, Holly, was you have to be prepared to keep the statement brief and simple, because you don't have a whole lot of time, and more importantly, you probably don't have a whole lot of information. You have to confirm the incident. You have to know what the incident is and hold on those details, because you don't necessarily know them at all times. But confirming the incident so parents and your stakeholders are aware of what's happening is really important. Share priorities and then your action steps. In other words, what are you doing? Our public wants to know, your parents want to know that you're in charge and you're doing what you said you're going to do. with respect to that incident. And then who's involved? Is it police on site? Is fire there? Is your crisis response team activated? And you also want to reassure your stakeholders. So from that, develop that concise statement to be used in all your traditional methods, but keeping in mind that speed is the most important thing here. So you're not going to have a lot of time to put together that information. The other interesting thing about with the response statement is develop a list of those frequently asked questions that are coming in, that you're going to see if you're monitoring your social media as people are calling, asking questions, or the kinds of information. And this summer, at our seminar, we did a little tabletop work on response statements and had people use various different social media platforms in which to respond. And I think participants got a chance to see how rapid fire that is and how unsettling it can be.
Right, because you put it kind of in real time, and you know, and it was kind of funny because you have a room full of PR professionals who put these statements together all the time, and yet we still kind of struggle in this stuff. And I think that social media plays a part in that, don't you? And that
it doesn't. I think the reason we kind of struggle, I think, from time to time, is that we sort of revert back to what we've always done, and we have to be in a crisis. You are really at the mercy of the incident and at the mercy of a really rapidly changing circumstance. And so thinking on your feet and more importantly, acting on your feet is going to drive the change of how we respond.
And do you do those tabletop exercises too with administrators and just to kind of get everybody thinking about how quickly things need to be responded to and how to word some of those things, or, you know, especially in maybe a smaller district?
I do, because I think when we practice with these drills, and you know, your state, Michigan, probably has state required drills, just like Minnesota. Many states have required drills. That's one subset of kind of conditioning the brain what to do. What I always call create the cultural condition to know what to do when the real world situation occurs. It's the same way when you do tabletop scenarios. Is it gives you an opportunity to practice what you would do with a likely scenario that could occur, probable, even though it's in its most rarity form. And so as you experienced, as Tom and many others this summer, it gave you a chance to experience what you would do with some colleagues, and they all come at it a little bit differently depending on how they have structured their process and the response.
Right. And the wording, you know, we were able to, someone used this word, and that's a good way to put it. And that, you know, it is a good exercise for us. And then going back to that, right? After the incident's over, you've learned more information. Like we kind of had an issue at the beginning of the year. And I know once it was over, I thought, okay, here's how I might have written that statement if this comes up again.
And that's a great point, because we call it hot wash in the emergency management field. Others will call it debrief. But as soon as you can, you want to do a hot wash of what did you learn? What were the challenges? And if you recall, one of the things that we try to do when we do these scenarios, these tabletops or these conversations is, what did we learn? What would we do differently? And what were our greatest challenges? And I think those are the three most important learnings that or our takeaways, I should say, that we then apply the next time around, even though each situation is going to be different and will require some adjustment, some way of looking at it a little bit differently. Your stakeholder group might be different. It might be smaller, it might be larger, depending on the situation.
Right. And elementary versus middle school or high school. I mean, you always look from that audience perspective, right?
Right. And then you also run the risk that the crisis that you're managing, there's a secondary incident. We all know that crises don't happen when we want them to, and don't necessarily follow a set script. And so we have to be prepared for those kinds of situations. And sometimes there's a crisis within a crisis. And how do we think on our feet? And so when I do tabletop scenarios working with school districts across the country, we do those interjects because and do it at a time they don't expect it, because you may have to shift then your focus on what to do. Let me give you a classic example. So this week we had a car accident near a school, hit a power pole, knocked power out to three of schools and partial power to another school. right about the perfect time when everyone's going to lunch. Remember, crisis doesn't let you know when it's going to occur. So now you're not only responding, okay, we're out of power. What does that look like? What are we assessing at 2 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school? And then what's it like for lunch? And by the way, it's only the first period of lunch, and all of them have at least 3 periods of lunch, right? Do we have enough hot food? So you're working through these scenarios and waiting to get some sort of assessment from, in our case, Xcel Energy, to let us know how long are we going to be out of power, because do we need to then close a school, evacuate a school out of safety? Do we need to start rolling buses? And then you have another school calling in that says, we're partial power, and oh, by the way, our ovens aren't working, so we can't serve hot food. What do we do? That's in what started out as probably kind of what some would say an everyday incident, really not every day, but something you'd likely occur to. This is now expanded. We've got 4 schools at a critical time, and we don't know how long power is going to be out, and what does that look like? And fortunately, they did get power back up fairly quickly. But it was interesting because our just outside my door is our emergency operations center, and it was a bevy of activity. And on top of that, developing communication to the parents that are affected by that, and what that looks like for them, and what do they need to do, if anything.
Right. And what a good example, because that is sort of like, the daily function that you expect to go smoothly. You always kind of expect some outside force to create a crisis or cause you to go into crisis mode. But it could be, you're right, that disruption of the daily routine that you don't necessarily plan for. It's a good one. I'm going to bring that up at our next meeting.
Well, and I always say these situations are always, I use them. There'll be a scenario on some training that I do coming up, because like I said, it was very unique in some respects, as they always are.
Right.
We had the middle school cafeteria has large windows, so there's natural lighting. It didn't affect them to eat their lunch. The high school cafeteria, elementary cafeteria, from a much smaller scale, it was almost pitch black except for the emergency exit lighting, and so kids are using their cell phones to light the food. That's a little bit easier to do.
Right.
But then now what happens when you have to change lunch period and you're moving people in the dark and bringing people in? Those are the kinds when you're assessing, I bring that long before I got into school public relations. I was a paramedic working on an ambulance. And that's the one thing you always did, was to assess first and respond, unless it's of a critical, imminent death, life or death situation, then you're responding much quicker. But sometimes you have to take a step back, assess what you have, and begin the response. And then communications being such a critical part of that, getting that up and ready. And because parents are texting, kids are texting their parents are sending us messages, they're calling, and we've got to be prepared for that, as you would in any kind of situation.
Well, let's talk about that, because no longer is it just the school being the one to be able to do the communicating, right? I mean, social media and texting and cell phones, that's created, just like we mentioned before, a whole different dynamic to it. Do you think that we're dealing with more crisis situations simply because of that? I mean, before, we might have a game plan, we can communicate that and let everyone know everything's okay. But now you've got parents saying, I can't believe there's not any power at the school. What are they doing? And kids saying, I'm eating in the dark. And it just kind of puts this message out there.
Well, I mean, you absolutely nailed it on the head. And the social media has created us very, very complex and challenges for us because of that. And so what used to be that if we could get a message out within a half hour or an hour after an incident, we thought we were doing okay. It is really a matter of minutes. And so one of the protocols I would strongly recommend all school districts do is to be prepared when you have a situation. So use your mass notification system. We happen to have Blackboard, their school messenger. We pop that up and get that ready. We know which schools are impacted, at least initially, and we're getting a message crafted as soon as possible, while still assessing, because what we don't want to do is send bad information out, get parents scrambling and all worried. Knowing, though, what you're saying, Holly, is true. You've got students that are texting mom and dad. Can you imagine your high school child saying, Mom, I'm in a cafeteria, all the power's out, we don't know what's going on? To the parent, as a parent, what do? We think the worst. We truly think the worst, that something's happening in the school. And so as soon as we could get a message out that would kind of alleviate those concerns, there was a car accident that took a power pole that is affected, that immediately brings the level of anxiety and fear down. That's one of the things we want to do when we communicate about the incident. Now we're dealing with, but we have a power outage and we're working to get that corrected, and students are safe, so on and so forth, all those kinds of things that people do.
Mm-hmm.
What
and
that does then,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, what that does is that creates that foundation of information for parents, your stakeholders. So if they're getting information from their child, they can then tweet or text back to them with, okay, we did hear from the school district, because in some cases the school may not have that information to share with all the students. The PA system was down in this case, so it's really word of mouth. And so we're on cell phones talking to the principals, relaying information. This is what we know. So they can start to share internally to their staff, and then staff can share with students. Again, you want to bring that anxiety and fear kids may have down, particularly at the elementary level. Being in the middle of the day, and it was a sunny day, it works. If it was cloudy or whatever, it might be a little bit more anxiety for our younger kids.
Right. And snowy and -10, right? and it's always good to say at the end, and we'll keep you updated as we get more information, right? I mean, how many times, just using this as an example, how many times did you then communicate information on this?
So what we did, because it was fairly soon thereafter that we learned the power would be coming back on in about 20 to 30 minutes, obviously we communicated that to the principals. So we said, you operate as normal, but you may want to delay your lunches, and then you'll have to adjust your schedule as it comes. But and then we always, in those kind of situations when it impacts more than one school, we will take over the communication to parents so we can just do it quicker. And obviously without power, they didn't have access to the computers. So what we did is, once we heard that, we sent a message out to parents letting them know that kids are safe, the police are on the scene of the incident, XL Energy was there, and we expect power to be on within 20 to 30 minutes. And then we followed up and that was within about an hour of the initial incident. We then followed up probably an hour after power was back on. Within that hour, we sent out updated information, sort of put everything to bed. Here's what happened, here's what time, here's where it came on, here's what we did. And then we kind of, we praised our staff. It was no one was injured, no one was in danger, and our staff did a great job as they're trained and they drill for these kinds of emergencies. And that reinforces the parents. And it's interesting because then yesterday we heard from parents via email, thank you for keeping us in the loop, and some of them sharing with us what their child had shared with them when they got home.
Now, if there were a much more serious crisis, say there were students injured, or you have a threat or a shooting. I mean, when you look at the quickly getting some information out, and then you're always learning something new, how often do you recommend keeping in contact with your parents with those messages? I mean, how do you stay on top of that?
Well, what's interesting, and I think, again, it goes back to the challenges of social media. We live in a world now where you don't have a whole lot of time, short decision time. So one, you have a lack of information. Two, you have short decision time. And what does that create? It creates uncertainty. And our public is always motivated to want to reduce the uncertainty in their mind, and more so stakeholders who are most connected to that incident, and meaning parents and often siblings of our staff members. They're the ones that are going to want to know as much as possible. Then you have what I call, your gapers or looky-loos that want that. What happens in that situation? You have uncertainty. It's going to lead to you and I and others in that position to seek out what that information is. And so, unfortunately, that information void is going to be filled by someone, and it's usually someone that's misinformed, ill-informed, someone that may be motivated to do harm to your organization. If you have a disgruntled parent or community member, they're going to start to flood the airwaves, so to speak, via social media and let folks know what's going on, and it's going to be misinformation. You'll recall this summer that was one of the things we did do as part of the response statements, and you got a chance to see when you have these folks that are doing that, the trolls, if you will, putting their information. So it's really important that once you get that initial response statement out, to follow up as you know more. A much more involved incident is going to be more information will come fairly rapidly as the incident evolves. In some cases, it was interesting, I was working with police this morning as we develop our drills of likely scenarios that may not be evolutionary. It may take some time, a hostage situation across the street of a school. It may take hours. So does your school want to be in lockdown for hours, which is really a complete disruption? Or do you want to move to sort of a shelter in place, secure the building, no one's getting out, no one's coming in, but let's do business as usual kind of thing? Having that information and sharing that with parents is important. And then the other point is, what are you going to do with your parents when this incident is going on? You can tell parents till you're blue in the face not to show up at their child's school. They're going to. So where are you going to put them if they can get close enough? And if they can't, likely because of a perimeter set up by police, you have an alternate location that you can share with just those parents, and try not to get out in the public so the media is chasing them down, but get to that spot. Then you have a person there that can provide face-to-face updated information.
Mm-hmm. So, and that just brings up kind of my next topic too. You have a person at that spot where the parents are. This is all part of putting that response team together. As a one-person office, and I know there are other one-person offices tuning in today too, or even if you have a bigger office, how do you realize, do you have that team already set up? Okay, I know I'm going to put this person where the parents go if that scenario arises. Is that something you really plan out ahead of time, or is it kind of scenario by scenario? Because that's got to be just crucial to make sure you've got the right people in the right spots.
And I think you hit the word, it's crucial. It is absolutely crucial that you have a plan, and your plan is how you're going to respond, not only from a communications perspective, but how you're going to physically respond to those kinds of situations. And part of that plan is, it can really be created from a this is what we're going to do, all kinds of situations, and then it's driven by the magnitude or the seriousness of it and the length of the likely crisis. But we can follow the more common practice, which is an instant command system, which is it really came through the emergency arena, fire, police, and has really moved into schools in the last 5 to 10 years. That incident command structure, even for one person in shops, you're going to have other people that are going to be helping your superintendent, maybe the district assistant superintendent. They'll have roles and responsibilities. So if you have that location where you're going to put your parents and you're sending someone there, make sure it's someone that's in the know. Make sure, maybe it's your district school psychologist or a social worker that has that experience from another school to work with grieving parents or upset parents. But make it also the location where you're going to reunify with your kids, because you don't want to send them someplace and then have them relocate if you're going to when you do reunification with your children. But it is important to have a plan. I think that's the most important thing. Probably the most important question I get often is what's in that plan? And that plan is what you will do, how you will do it, and when you will do it.
Mm-hmm. One question we did have come in is, the schools are probably reasonably able to respond in a sort of these smaller crises and things, but and you've obviously had experience with much larger crises, the Columbine shooting being one of them. What should be in place in the event of a big crisis? Obviously, this team being one of them. So what should we be prepared for or be thinking about? I mean, you can only practice for these major events so much. How can we better prepare for those major events?
Well, really having the team in place. So what I counsel schools, regardless of the size and districts, is to have a building emergency response team. then the district should have an emergency response team, because in most cases, what people don't realize is if the school building is in crisis, as responding to an incident, in many cases, they're going to be able to deal with it as it unfolds or as it has wrapped up. Those large-scale incidents, they're likely going to be locked down like everyone else, or they're going to be evacuated like everyone else. So you're not going to have means to those things. Even take, for example, our power outage at 4 schools this week. They were incapacitated from the ability to communicate with their parents because their phones were out and their computers were out. They had cell phones, and so, mass notification systems, they could have access to do that. But that's why we have a district emergency response team to assist those schools. So those are 2 really very, very important things. The other one is to have that plan. Who's going to do what? And if you follow an incident command system, there's a specific structure and responsibilities that's aligned with that. The other thing then, if you take the mass incident, a mass casualty incident like Columbine or at Sandy Hook or any of the other ones, you're going to need help. We needed help, even though I had a team of 6 individuals. So in Michigan, call on your colleagues closest to, and then maybe consider statewide. The beauty of technology today is you can also call nationally. You can call, the National School Public Relations Association, the Michigan State Chapter. You can have your regional state chapters that are all going to be able to help you. When the tornadoes hit Moore, Oklahoma 2 years ago now, there was a team of people that went from Texas, or a team of people that were there obviously from around Oklahoma and Kansas, and some of us that worked from afar. So you had boots on the ground and you had people from afar. So don't consider it that you have to do it alone. You may in the first couple hours, but there are resources and people always willing to help out. And I've been involved in every one of the school mass casualty shootings since Columbine in some way, shape, or another, and a large part is assisting them from afar, providing resources, giving them materials, advice, consultation, without ever having to leave what I'm doing today, like with the SCN.
Right, we're all going to need that direction probably, because it isn't something that we deal with. Right. Let's go back to social media just a little bit. I want to share, let me get this up here. This was great. We're talking a social media plan. So maintaining a robust crisis communication strategy demands the complete integration of social media into the organization's emergency management plan. Do you want to walk us through this? Because I think we all have a crisis communications plan, but what are the specifics in that social media?
So in the social media plan, and you're right, you have an emergency response plan, you have a crisis communications plan within that, and then you have a social media plan within your crisis communications. And so really what the crisis communications, or the social media plan within that, is what you're going to do and what platforms you have available to you, and how you're going to do that. In many school districts, they have preset posts, if you will, for Facebook and Twitter, and that what happens in a crisis is you want to cease those operations. You want to delete those pre-scheduled or automated content, because all your social media content may be viewed as official on-the-record statements. So cease the operations, and then you sort of command, or you take over what information you're sharing. And by doing that, you obviously want to acknowledge the situation, and very quickly. When you develop your message, think about it that you're going to use all of your outlets. Just don't write for, Twitter is 140 characters. That's great, but you have to consider that you want all the messaging that you're going to be sending out needs to be used in all those channels. So for specifically with Twitter that has a limited number of characters, you may have to put something together very quickly and then direct them to like your website where they'll get more information. You want to be able to prepare for the uncertainties of what's going to happen. And then this slide that you popped up is, these are just some things to do or not do. Someone told me recently, as they were dealing with a crisis, people lose their minds when it comes to social media, and that's absolutely true. And our biggest, we want to run out there and we want to defend ourselves, and we want to say, that's not us. We wouldn't do that. We're not bad people. And you know what? If you try to get into an argument with someone like that, you're going to lose. So don't join into that conversation if you don't belong. Post your relevant information, repost it or get people to share it, get people to retweet it. Don't feed those trolls. If you stay professional and not defensive, the truth is going to win out. You're going to be, at the end of the day, when most people are looking at how you responded, which is really, when they look at the crisis, it's more of how you responded. If you stay professional and not defensive, you're going to come out okay. Correct, don't delete. If you delete information or you take down your account, unless under very dire circumstances, it's going to really hurt your credibility and reputation. And to come back from that is going to be very difficult. Monitor your many outlets and listen to your audiences. That drives a lot of what the information you're doing. When we did this tabletop scenarios, one of the things I think many of the participants saw is, oh my God, we didn't think of that. So by monitoring what people were saying, you can respond, you can develop that. And then target your influential stakeholders. That third-party endorsement to this day is the tried true way of how you get through these kinds of things, and having the trusted sources that will kind of come to bat for you.
Right. And going on back to a couple of these things, I know it's so difficult for us to see those negative messages come in, and, you take it kind of personally, and sometimes we just have to kind of take it though, right? I mean, I guess that's what social media is allowing people to get involved, and sometimes they're going to be negative. They
are. We sort of have to put our big boys and girls pants on and just, steel ourselves to it, and don't try to take it on. Our district has been involved, unfortunately, for the last year and a half in a very tough labor negotiations with our teachers union. And the upside to all that is that we reached a tentative agreement this week, but it got pretty ugly because there was a Facebook page that was created, and it was nasty. It was, some staff were involved in it, and we had others, and it just got really ugly. And they took to task the superintendent. They took me to task because we were communicating things, and it was so hard for our staff to want to tell people, well, that's not true. The reality, folks, is just like, look at the national election. You're going to have people on one side, people on another side, and you're not going to be able to sway many of them. Look at it if you've ever done a referendum. You have the yes voters, you have the no voters. You have a group of people in between. Really, who you're talking to are the people in between, because your yes voters are always going to be defending you and by your side. Your no voters, there's a wasted time and energy because you can't convince people. It's the same way with social media. You're not Sally Field. Not everyone's going to like you.
And sometimes too, we have to put it in perspective, right? I mean, even though we see that the reach is thousands and big numbers, the actual number of those being negative might still be a relatively small percentage, right?
It really is. And that was hit home for us as we, the page started slow, this Facebook page I'm referencing, and then I think it ended up with about 1,400 likes, if you will. That only means that those people were liking it so they could follow it, because it was a relatively small group of people that were constantly posting information or taking jabs. But what really hit home for us was we looked back on some previous community surveys, and while 90+% of our community has access to some form of technology, the majority of them are cell phones, Facebook was among the smallest that scored in this survey. So the response that we were sharing with our leadership and our school board is, don't get so worked up about it, because it's the smallest in terms of the number of the people that have access to Facebook or actually use it. And yet you're focusing on the dozen or so the people that are posting every single day. That's not the majority of people. And I would challenge school districts to think of it in their community. If they know their community and can assess from that perspective, we wouldn't get so upset when we see someone that talks negatively about us. And then the other thing is, because a lot of those people, we went right to them and said, come and talk to us, come and sit down, we'll share information with you, we'll give you any access to the data that we're putting out there. You can then walk away if you don't believe us, but give us a chance to share our perspective. What we found out is, and it's what Pat Jackson said 100 years ago, when facts and emotions collide, emotions win every time. And we have to keep that perspective.
Real quickly, a question that did come in regards to your power outage. What communications channels did you use? Voice, text, social media, or all of the above?
All of the above. And so we first, one of our planned calls for a priority is use our mass notification system, Blackboard in this case, and we sent that out to the parents of those students of the affected schools. That message then also was posted on our website, as well as our social media, so that we got information, because parents are going to get that information in community and they can start to go, and it's really, you're training your community, you're training your stakeholders to know where to go for that information. And every chance we get, we tell parents and stakeholders that's where you go for information, and we'll get it up as quickly as possible. So those various channels, that's what we did. And if this would have been something that would have lasted several hours, and if we would have had to evacuate a school, we would have probably reached out to media then as well. We're a first ring suburb of Minneapolis, so unless it takes something big to bring them even the 30 miles from downtown to cover us, we probably involve media unless it was something that was more impactful.
Now, going back to kind of how you ended the last question, perspective, that's something we need to really think about when we respond to these crises, right? We need to kind of change our perspective.
It is. And I think one of the things that we often do, and not just communications professionals, I think in education we do this a lot. Our webmasters and others, that when we put things together, it's what looks good to us or what we want to say. And it's a bit of an arrogance, because I think what we have to do is put ourselves in the shoes of our stakeholders. I call it perspective taking. It's an element in everything we do, more so in the communication. And basically, it's the ability to view the crisis or view the organization or the initiative or the incident, whatever the case may be, from the stakeholders' viewpoint. And so if we put ourselves in the shoes of a parent, how would they react? How would they be feeling? We then are better prepared to develop communications and response and engagement, for that matter, based on that viewpoint, not what we think looks good. And so when I'm working with the superintendent or other leaders in the school, especially principals, and they want to put it out a certain way, we'll look at it from the standpoint, is that how your parents will view it? And so taking out the educational jargonese, not becoming very verbose about the response. We feel sometimes that you have to put more words in there for people to understand it. No, they want simple facts and information. And as we talked about previously, Holly, is what's happening, who's doing what, and are my kids safe and secure?
Right. Now, do you ever bring parents in? I mean, even if it's just the parents that you know, as kind of part of your debrief afterwards? Hey, how did you take this message? Or, kind of looking at it from that perspective?
So we have in Bloomington, we have a PTSA council, which is a rep, a PTSA or PTA rep from every school that's on a council. They're really our sounding board. They meet once a month, but we use them in those kinds of situations you're talking about. So the schools that were impacted, we would reach out to them and say, the information that you received, did you receive in a timely manner? What was your takeaway? How did you respond? And so absolutely, we want to know how they reacted to that information, and was it enough for them? And if not, what could we have done differently? When we've done that in the past, sometimes we've found, and I think it underscores the importance of getting information out fairly quickly, is that's really, I think, the one takeaway many of the parents have shared with us, is that, I heard from my child first, or, the over the fence the grapevine network is alive and well in most communities. that's your challenge. That's your goal, is to beat your grapevine network. But it's all usually in a very positive sense. But they're not afraid to share if they're critical about something that you said or did. We had an incident where we had what was reported to be someone that attempted to get a girl in his car, and we used some language in that we probably shouldn't have, because it created the fear, anxiety went from here to here, and when all was said and done, it was just an older gentleman who truly had lost his favorite hunting cap, and he was walking the neighborhood looking for it, and he saw this girl get off the bus and asked her if she could help him find his hat. And so even after doing this for 25 years, you go, ooh, that we could have done better.
Right. Well, and that's, I think, sometimes the difficult part, because you don't know the situation, and would you rather be safe than sorry? Right.
I think it's a great point, because I think that's the thing we weigh. I remember that this incident was last spring, and my team, we were weighing what is the information we're going to put out there. And I think if we would have just changed the terminology to not an attempted abduction, because it wasn't, that's what was reported, and that's what the police had reported. But take that level down to is a suspicious person in the neighborhood. Take away the attempted abduction. He didn't attempt to abduct her. Use different language. I think the fear level would have been reduced. But I think people would still been very aware. And I think perhaps that's probably when we said attempted abduction, the awareness went from here to here, which is good. But I think it would have been there anyway had we had used different language. So that was our takeaway. But that was one of those that we talked to a number of our parents, and they said, boy, after we found out, that seemed to be kind of hit us between the eyeballs. And we always look at things a little bit differently after the fact. We always wear different glasses after the fact, so we have to be careful. But I would say that we made a mistake, and I've always seen mistakes as a great learning opportunity, and that we would never do that again.
Now, out of curiosity, because we had kind of one of those miscommunication things too. I mean, we had kind of a suspicious situation that turned out to be a misunderstanding. Did you follow up with your families then and tell them what you had learned, or did you kind of let the media play that out, or how did you handle that afterwards?
We did actually both. We did send communication out to parents, and we apologized that our messaging may have created more anxiety for them. But after saying that, we then also praised the fact that no one was hurt, and that the situation was what it was. And in some respects, we had to do a little. We didn't throw anyone under the bus, but we did have to eat a little crow on that, because we were acting on information that was given to us by police, and we didn't want to throw the police under the bus. We just simply. And that was a bit of a debate internally, and the position I had taken is, no, you know what, let's eat this one. It's on us. Let's take the responsibility. We apologize. We move on from it. And were there some folks out there saying shame on us for, calling an old guy looking for his favorite hunting cap an attempted abduction? I think people are smart enough to know that we didn't have that information at the time.
Right.
We were operating on information that was provided to us based on a young girl at that information she shared with police, and that's what we did. But in hindsight, changing the language and then following up with that, because I think really for us the outcome was on a very positive end. No one was hurt. It really wasn't anything to be concerned about. But did it drive more parents to be alert? And we shared that, absolutely.
Well, since we're admitting our mistakes here, right? Let's end on kind of a positive swing by learning from our mistakes. What do you think are a school district's or a PR professional's kind of biggest mistake when it comes to the crisis?
I think, not responding in a really timely fashion, and then probably in some cases giving more information that is really necessary. I think we want to not look bad. A crisis is a crisis. It's going to happen. You didn't cause it in most cases. And you have to deal with it. We can't control what kids do. We can't control what parents do. But we can control the aftermath and how we're responding to it. So I think the biggest mistake that we make is believing that that we can control bad things, and we can't. But we can make bad things worse, and that's the one thing that we don't want to do.
All right. Well, their 45 minutes is up. That absolutely flew by. Rick, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at various other conferences and continuing to learn more. Your expertise is just so appreciated, and thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, and thank you to everyone that took time on their lunch, and hopefully they got to eat, and we didn't cause any bad stomach problems with that. But thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everybody. We'll put a note out for our guest next month, so stay tuned and have a wonderful rest of your week.